Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Ambassador John Bolton, former National Security Advisor in the Trump administration. Ambassador, welcome to The Print.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Glad to be here.
So the reason we're talking is, of course, about, in connection with your book, The Room Where It Happened. I don't have a copy with me, but and with the pandemic and, India has been hit quite hard. So our bookstores haven't opened yet, but I'm sure we'll all get there soon. You had a big falling out with President Trump last year when you resigned in September 2019. But when I read your book, and I read a PDF copy, you have very few instances about India. You had 2 or 3, conversations with the president about India. And one of them, so this is my first question to you, is about the India-Pakistan crisis in Balakot last year in February. So tell me a little bit about it. You don't seem to be, you didn't think it was too much of a crisis. You basically said it really wasn't one.
Well, I said that in part because it didn't go any further than it went, and not to downplay it, but one problem for us was we were all in Hanoi at the time, getting ready for President Trump's second summit with Kim Jong-un. Right. So Mike Pompeo and I spent a fair amount of time on the telephone late into the evening in Hanoi with Ajit Doval and others. The people at the Pentagon in Washington were on the phone with their counterparts in India and Pakistan. So we stayed up well past our bedtime, I can tell you that, in Vietnam, trying to figure out how we could be helpful and what might be necessary. And I think the fact there was that although there's no doubt in my mind India had acted in legitimate self-defense, it also behaved in a very prudent fashion after the attack and the crisis wound down. But it was a reflection for us of the potential danger of something flaring up on the subcontinent. The history is well known. And when you have 2 nuclear powers right next to each other like that, it's always a matter of concern. I would say on the larger question that I think is implicit in what you said of why isn't there more in the book on India? Yeah. I guess my first answer is the publishers only let me have so many pages, but more importantly, it reflects the absence of very much strategic thinking in the Trump administration on some of these huge questions that we face in this century, and especially, I think, both for India and the United States, how to deal with China. And it was a regret I had while I was in the White House, and one that I certainly have now, that we did not have more opportunity to discuss and consider what our approach should be. There certainly was some. I think Prime Minister Abe of Japan deserves a lot of credit for encouraging trilateral meetings among India, Japan, and the United States. I think we saw the benefit of bringing Australia and even New Zealand in as part of the larger Asia-Pacific region. Obviously, all the countries of Southeast Asia are concerned. They don't call it Indochina for nothing. And you've just seen recently in the attack in Ladakh of what the Chinese are capable of on the land border between India and China. So this is, I think, for the United States, how to deal with China is the existential question of the 21st century, and really it is for everybody on China's periphery as well.
So 2 questions from that, Ambassador Bolton. The first is to go back to the Balakot crisis, to the India-Pakistan crisis, where you said you guys were in Vietnam and you spoke to your Indian counterpart, Ajit Doval. So what is it that you told him, or what is it that he told you? Do you remember?
Well, basically, we were trying to find out what was going on. And, we were far from our base of operations, to say the least. The Pentagon had heard certain things, I think, initially from the Pakistani side. They called us.
This is when the Indian jets violated Pakistani airspace, if you like, and bombed and, took out the terror the terrorist camps near Islamabad.
Right. I think the initial call from Pakistan was to the effect that the Indians have attacked us or something like that. So it was not an even-handed comment, as you might expect. But we didn't really know all of what had happened before. We had been certainly in Hanoi preoccupied with getting ready for the summit the next day.
Sure.
So we were trying to inform ourselves. We were speaking. We had our staff speaking with many others in Washington, with the American Embassy in Delhi, and just trying to figure out what was going on, to get the Indian perspective and to understand how it was seen there. And I think we went late into the evening. Things wound down. I think I called Ajit Doval after returning to the United States and had a good conversation with him, where I said we thought that India had behaved responsibly and prudently, and it was entitled to act in its own self-defense. That's how we would feel as Americans. But it was not a textbook example of dealing with a crisis in the Situation Room. Being in Hanoi is pretty far away from our base of operations.
But did Mr. Doval say to you, or did you guys talk about how this could be wound down, and that, did India promise, or was there any commitment not to escalate this any further?
Well, I think apart from informing us what the reason for the attack was in the first instance, and explaining the nature of the targets and why they'd been selected, and that India felt that it was doing sort of the minimum of what it could do responsibly and had no further objectives in mind. And we said, basically, let's stay in touch on this. We talked to the Pakistanis, got their side of it. Look, we've seen enough of the relations between India and Pakistan to know that it's not for the United States to say, hey, look, can we help out resolve this? So
right.
we didn't make that offer, but we did say we're here and are happy to talk to you at any point. And I think during the next day in Hanoi, events proceeded on their own between Islamabad and New Delhi, and things did begin to wind down.
Right. So there was no question of brokering a peace or something between India and Pakistan.
No, we didn't offer. I think you know this better than I do. The Pakistanis would have been very happy if we had decided to jump in, but we didn't think that was our place. And in any event, Pompeo and I were very busy the next day in Hanoi.
Sure. So you had a very bitter falling out with President Trump, but would you say subsequently, he came to India earlier this year in February, and it was a very rousing welcome. The Indians sort of really laid out the red carpet for him. So would you say that, in your book, you're not very generous to President Trump's comments about India, but would you say that he learned well?
No, I don't think he learned well generally, not in relation only to India. He is completely focused on his reelection. As we speak, we're 3 months away from November the 3rd. But in this period of time, reelection was constantly on his mind. So when he met with Prime Minister Modi and learned that in an upcoming visit to Washington, that Prime Minister Modi was stopping in Houston for a big Howdy Modi rally that the Indian American community was hosting for him. He invited President Trump to come to that. It was a huge success. I think everybody who was there agreed with that. The president focuses on all aspects of re-election, so he was delighted to meet in the prime minister, a politician like he was, and I thought the visit to India was a success for both countries. The issue is if President Trump wins re-election in November, what will be his policy toward India then, when he doesn't need to worry about the Indian American vote again? It has a lot to do with how things turn out with China in a whole variety of of issues, in part because of the hostility to China that I think is growing on a bipartisan basis in the United States today for a whole host of very legitimate reasons, not least of which is China's cover-up of the COVID-19 virus, what happened in China that hurt all of us, hurt all of the other countries that now are dealing with this pandemic because so much time was lost when we didn't know what had happened in China. But I don't think this is any guarantee of a trajectory of a Trump policy in a second term if there is one, and I think that's something India can be legitimately concerned about.
So are you saying that he isn't really interested in India or the Trump administration, or a second possible Trump administration may not be as interested?
Well, I don't know. I guess my point is you can't predict. Trump doesn't formulate national security policy on the basis of a clear philosophy. He doesn't do it on the basis of a grand strategy or even consistent policy. I've described his national security decisions as being like an archipelago of dots, and each one sort of stands on its own. So that's why different foreign leaders in dealing with Trump have tried different strategies to get him to focus on their interest. I think Prime Minister Modi, I've been in several meetings between him and the president, and he's maintained an even disposition despite some things that have been said. And I think
things.
Well, on trade issues and that sort of thing, and issues I would not have brought up, but others brought up. I would have wanted to talk more about China, but that's my own personal.
You would have wanted to talk China in conversations with Prime Minister Modi?
Strategically, yeah, because I think that this is an issue that confronts both India and the United States in a very fundamental way. Right. And look, we're not in the Cold War anymore. We're not in the post-Cold War anymore. We're in the 21st century. Sure. And I think reassessing the changing global strategic environment is critical for both of these two important countries. Mm-hmm.
So those conversations about China never really took place between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi?
Well, certainly by the time I left the White House, I would say the answer to that's no. I'm sure Prime Minister Modi, being a politician, would not say that publicly, but if you asked him privately, I bet that's what he would say.
Okay. You also talk in your book about India's insistence about, reducing the impact of the sanctions on Iran. And while, again, you're not very complimentary about it, but surely you can understand that the Indian side would have taken the position that sanctions on Iran would not be good for India because, the price of oil would be much higher. Surely you could understand. Surely you understand that.
Well, I understand it, but I didn't think that was the basis to keep the exception from the sanctions for India. We had taken Japan off the exception list. We took everybody off. And I would argue that in terms of bringing pressure on Iran, I wouldn't have given anybody any exemptions from the sanctions at the beginning. Sanctions work most effectively when they're massively applied very quickly without time for the target country to take mitigating steps. That may be hard on others, but it's part of a geopolitical calculus where you buy your oil from.
So I know you said earlier when we began this conversation that your book only has so many pages and therefore you can't talk much more than you did about India. But give me a sense of what the Trump administration, at least when you were there, thought about India, or did it not think very much because it was so chaotic that there were other things on the president's mind?
Well, the president didn't think very much about it because every day is a new day. This is the way I was told he ran the Trump organization, and that was successful. I thought that in the White House, the gravity of the responsibilities, the weight of the decisions he would have to make would bring more discipline and order to the process, but I was wrong about that. So having a kind of an abstract strategic discussion really wasn't his cup of tea, as they say in Britain. And so we didn't do a lot of it. And I think that was unfortunate from the U.S. perspective.
And yet he and Prime Minister Modi seem to have got along really well. It wasn't just howdy Modi, it was also howdy Trump.
Yeah. Well, look, I think President Trump sees international relations as being embodied in the personal relationship between the leaders of two countries. And I think he had difficulty distinguishing between a personal relationship on the one hand and the underlying bilateral relationships on the other. I'm not saying that personal relationships aren't important in international affairs. Of course they are, but they are not the entire relationship. And so that I think was a problem in trying to get through many of the trade issues, which Trump does think a lot about. He didn't like the adverse balance of payments between the U.S. and India. He didn't like the treatment of American goods being exported into the Indian market or some of the problems that they faced. So when we might have had an opportunity in meetings at the G20 or wherever to discuss the bigger picture, we didn't typically get to that in the bilateral meetings. And when we had trilateral meetings, trade would creep in there as well. When I think there, Prime Minister Abe and would have liked to have done more on the strategic side. We were hard pressed to get it done even there.
So last couple of questions, Ambassador Bolton. I know you have to run, but the question on China, Chinese troops have intruded into Indian territory in Ladakh. There's been several talks, military to military, also political conversations. They don't seem to be in any hurry getting out. What do you think? Do you think the US and India should come closer together and perhaps work on this?
Well, I think that China has a long-term strategy. I think you can see it in the Belt and Road Initiative. I think you can see it in the activities they've undertaken in the UN system, what they've done in the South China Sea, trying to create a province out of territory that's disputed with the neighbors. They've just done it on their own. The pressure they're applying to Taiwan in the East China Sea, the Senkaku Islands, and a whole range of other activities. And I think this military probing, if that's what it is, along the land border at the line of actual control with India, is more of the same. And I think we are going to see more of that. We can see it now in the weaponization of Huawei and ZTE, which are not commercial telecommunications companies. They are arms of the Chinese state. So the rest of the world can either respond to that, we can try and coordinate, or we can try and deal with it individually. And I think the Chinese would be delighted if we tried to deal with it individually. I think I give the Chinese great credit for broad strategic thinking. They're certainly a lot better at it than the United States, where we tend to think in terms of quarterly financial reports. So we've got to do better. I think we're coming to appreciate some of the risks and challenges a little bit late. I don't think it's too late. I think we've got time to respond. But I think in this kind of environment, when we see the activity that China's engaged in on a global basis, we ought to be talking to friends and allies about more coordinated responses.
Especially vis-a-vis the Indian situation, or are you talking more generally?
Well, I think more generally, but India is a huge country with enormous economic prospects. You've got a long land border, much of it contested with China. You've got Pakistan on your western border with nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles that are courtesy in large part of because of China. This is a strategically very difficult situation for India. And I do think the Cold War being long since over, it's time to consider what changes India will make in its policies and what changes the U.S. will make.
Because the troops incursion into Ladakh is of huge concern. They've been there a couple of months. They don't seem there's no sign of them getting out, although they keep promising that they will leave. So my question is, if India and the U.S. and other countries, other democracies, led by the U.S. perhaps, should come together and mount, a sort of a greater campaign.
Well, I think it's worth talking about how to respond more broadly across Chinese incursions over its borders. The Vietnamese have certainly had their share of experiences. In fact, I think the Russians are concerned, or they certainly should be concerned, because by the end of this century, Russian Far East Asia may not be part of Russia anymore if they're not careful. There are a whole range in the East China Sea. We see Taiwan and Japan that are concerned. So if you look at China probing along its the littoral countries, along its seacoast, along its land borders, these are not unconnected in China's mind. In Beijing, I think this is part of a strategy, which we don't fully understand. We haven't been able to discern its complete contours. But if the people who are being subject to these probes responded in a more coordinated fashion, I think it would affect Chinese thinking in a very material way. And you don't want to be in a position where you've got incursions from Ladakh on the one hand and problems on your western border simultaneously either. So this you can't sort of do this by ad hoc responses. It requires thinking about it, because you don't want one particular incident to escalate without having a longer range plan in mind on our side.
Right. And my last question, Ambassador Bolton, is about the Taliban. You were very critical about Trump inviting the Taliban to the White House, and that's something that I think India would have been supportive of your position. But it seems to me that the Americans have now brokered a so-called peace deal. We haven't seen very much of it unfolding, although around Eid over the weekend, the Taliban did promise to lay down arms, except that they come back again, and then more and more people are being killed, especially inside mosques in Afghanistan, which is very, very disturbing. What would you say?
Well, I don't trust the Taliban. I would not have taken these negotiations in the direction they want. I didn't have any objection to opening talks with them to see what we might be able to find out. But I don't think they have the slightest intention of adhering to their agreement with us. What they want are American troops out. I fear for the government of Afghanistan once that happens, and I think the odds are would favor Taliban retaking control of the country, and that's I think a grave threat to the United States and others around the world, because there's every reason to think the country would go back to exactly where it was before 9/11. The reason I think we should stay there is to help prevent that. But I think that is a position that's very much in jeopardy. And I think it's a problem, obviously, in our relations with Pakistan as well. So this is...
in what way is it a problem in your relations with Pakistan?
Well, because obviously Pakistan's been providing sanctuary for Taliban and other terrorist organizations, the Haqqani Network and others inside Pakistan for a long time. Everybody knows it. We know it from the days that we assisted the Mujahideen in their struggle against the Soviets. There's nothing new under the sun here. It's just a question of willingness to deal with it. And the Taliban are not united. They don't speak with one voice in any event. So I think this has kind of taken a very disturbing direction, and I hope that the government of Afghanistan itself doesn't fall more susceptible to what the Taliban may be up to here. I think we're in a potentially dangerous period 90 days before the U.S. election, when everybody's attention here will be diverted, that the Taliban may try and take advantage of it, which is what I think they did at the end of the religious truce.
But yet, Zalmay Khalilzad, your representative, surely knows everything that you've just said. So why did you push this peace deal?
I've known Zal for a long time, and he obviously knows Afghanistan as well as anybody. I think he was following the instructions of the president, and one day he'll have a chance to say what he thinks of the deal, too.
Ambassador Bolton, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for speaking to the print. I'm sure your book is going to be much more widely read once this pandemic allows us all to, come back and rejoin the real world, as it were. But all the best. You're a free man now, so I'm sure you have lots more time to write another book. Thank you again.
Well, thanks for having me.